I do not like being a boundary setter.
A what?
I do not like being a boundary setter. That's not what I do with my life. And to say in the abstract, these are the limits, is a dangerous thing to do. You know that famous judge who said, pornography, I know it when I see it. Sometimes I know where the limits are when I encounter them, and I say that's beyond where I can go. Do I say that's beyond where you may go? Very, very seldom. Very, very seldom. Is everything here liturgically my style? No. No. But I don't say it's us, or I don't say you may not go there. I had a famous moment in some of you, a few of you, where's Layla? Did she get up? Oh, she just walked out. Some of you will remember this story. In my years at RRC, I was tested by some students. Those were the days of first and second wave feminism coming into the Jewish community. And I was tested by a student who got up and said, I have statues of Canaanite goddesses that I collect, and I put them on the table to inspire me before I pray. And she wanted to get me, of course, and wanted to say, are you going to declare that beyond the limits? And when we declared it beyond the limits, she said that was a witch trial, and we were having witch trials in rabbinical school. Yes, you remember that, don't you, Chef? I see you were around in those days. I just looked up, and there you are. You remember those days. And then, of course, the rabbi who did that a year after graduation was comfortably ensconced as assistant rabbi in a very big Reform congregation in California, being very happy with probably the avodah zaras of American Jewish life, which were much worse in my eyes than those little statues she was playing with to challenge me. And if I asked what's forbidden, it might have been some of the values of that temple where she wound up working much more than those little statues which she was needing to prove herself with. Sorry? She wasn't there long. No, I'm not mentioning names, please. That's not, I didn't mean to make it so identifiable. I apologize to her for that, even without mentioning the name. I didn't mean it about a person. I'm just saying I have learned I learned from that experience not to get up and say, these are the boundaries, you may not go beyond them. I don't do that. I try to exemplify what I do. I try to teach in an open-hearted way. And I try to say, take responsibility. Take responsibility not only for your own spiritual life, but take responsibility for the future of this tradition, for the future of this language, and the future of the Jewish people. Understand that if you have a title of rabbi or other Jewish spiritual leader, you are in that responsible place, and people will see you there, whether you have chosen to see yourself there or not. So you bear that responsibility, understand it. More than that, I can't say. Here are the boundaries, and here they aren't. Now, asking about Zalman and me is a little bit unfair, of course, because he's not here. He's not here to take his role, and I can't pretend to his role. But he and I had some disagreements about how far one can go in partaking of and feeling yourself part of other traditions. I felt I was always a visitor in the non-Jewish world, and that I was a visitor who tried to go there with an open heart and learn things. I did not become a participant. Zalman was a lover of Ta'amu Ru'u Tov Hashem, taste and see, and believed that you could taste and see, and that was all right, and that by tasting you would get something of the experience of what it meant to be an insider in those other traditions. And we disagreed about that, lovingly disagreed about that. We're at somewhat different places about it, and each of you will decide what you have to do. And that's all I can say. But do that with a sense of that responsibility and how you are seen in the world.
When the voice spoke again to Moshe about Yud-Heh Vav-Heh being the name, I explicitly said El Shaddai was no longer efficacious. That was needed to deal with the supernal crisis. Are we not in such a crisis today? How does that address your desire to keep the old liturgy?
No, I don't think I don't think the Torah said El Shaddai no longer works. I was known to the ancestors by El Shaddai, now I'm giving you a new revelation. He did not, the text does not say, therefore you may not call me El Shaddai anymore. I think that's all I have to say. The point is clear. You have new ways. God bless you. God bless those new ways, and may they become natural enough and part of the tradition as you pass on to your disciples. But to say old ways don't work, who are you to say that for other people? Open your hearts to people who live in the more traditional parts of the community too. I still like the fact that I can walk into a Hasidic shtibel and daven there, and understand that there is a spiritual life there that's very much a part of Yiddishkeit and very much a part of my heritage and who I am. And I'm sorry women can't do it in the same way as men. I say that with apologies, but I do not avoid going into separate seating synagogues, partly because I want to open myself to that part of my own heritage and where I come from. So you may say this language no longer works for me. I understand that. I feel the pain that led you to say that. But I don't think you can say this language no longer works. Yeah, there are a few places where there is moral offense. And there I have changed the liturgy and would not lead a service that didn't change that liturgy. I have not said Shelo Asani Goyer, Shelo Asani Isha in many, many years. And I simply cannot say those things. I dropped Ben Yisrael La'amim from my Havdalah because the idea that you line up Yisrael and the nations along with Or and Choshech and Kodesh and Chol was anathema to me. For many years in the Shabbat morning service, I have not said the nations of the world may not rest in Shabbos, the uncircumcised may not take pleasure in it. I said no, everybody's welcome to my Shabbos, so I put in Yismuchu instead. There are certain places, that's most of the list, but not the whole list, but that's most of the list of the places where I felt, no, the liturgy was morally offensive to me in ways that I had to change it. But those are relatively few places.
In the presence of incest survivors, or women, or anyone who may have experienced sexual abuse, how do we talk or teach about teachings that say all is chesed? How do we reimagine teaching to embody people's experiences of assault?
With open-heartedness and probably with lots of silence. I think that's the first thing to say. To recognize the wounds of people, and in quoting that teaching, I did not mean to bring up any hurting people's lives. On the other hand, there is a recognition in the tradition that I wanted to talk about, and I do talk about it, which says that yes, all of eros comes from a sacred place, and that it is distorted, and that distortion has to be noticed. It is fallen and distorted and twisted, and we have to notice that and speak up against that, and at the same time recognize that it comes from the one place of love within us, that place that became wounded and therefore can do terrible things to other people, and the terribleness of those things is not to be minimized one bit. But yet to say that, yes, every human being, including the torturer and the Nazi and so on, has a soul. And that soul came out of a place of love and needs love, and did the horrible things it did because of distortion and suffering, and therefore to be there with a full range of human pain, including the pain that turned those people into the doers of the monstrous things they did.
Where do you see Aleph and the larger world of Jewish renewal in the Neo-Hasidic project?
Yes, we are, as I told the story yesterday, I said when Zalman created B'nai Or in the living room on Emlyn Street in a house around the corner from us in Philadelphia, a house my wife and I had found for him and Ilana when we went house hunting. And we went and we came out and we said, we will be first cousins to that brotherhood. Because there was some difference in style between us and what B'nai Or was in the 1980s. And so we grew up over the last 40 years as cousins to that brotherhood. I feel very close to everything you do here, but I'm not a part of the renewal movement as it exists in this form, and I recognize that. I'm a close, affectionate friend and supporter, and so I bless everything you do here. My style is a little bit different. We are all together heirs of the Hasidic tradition. Zalman wrote so beautifully in his book about Hasidic tales, that introduction where he went to the grave of the Baal Shem Tov and talked about grafting onto the tree. Because Zalman and I both remember Shtibel, where there was that great tree on the wall. Somewhere in a side room of a Shtibel you would see a tree. The Baal Shem Tov was the root, and then everything else was growing out of it in the branches. And every Shtibel, every Rebbe Shtibel had a tree like that. So you would see where on the tree of Hasidism his particular dynasty came from. So Zalman said he wanted to graft us onto the tree. And that's very moving language. I'm very moved by that. My grafting is in some of the same places as Zalman's, but not really, because he grafts people onto the tree of the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was his Rebbe. And I would graft people onto the tree probably of the Chernobler, who was my Rebbe, and to Reb Nachman, who was my Rebbe, a little bit less to the Chabad path. And so we come from some different places, but it's the same tree that we are trying to expand. And the project of Neo-Hasidism is that which I have described. And the importance of our doing the project together is what I have described, because there are other claimants to the mantle of Hasidism, those claimants on those hilltops in Judea and Samaria, or in the West Bank, and those claimants who are distorting the Hasidic message to mean that it's only about us and it's about the unique superiority of Judaism above everything else. So there are battles to be fought, and we are all on the same side in those battles, and that's really what's important to me. And there'll be some varieties of style and differences of approach, and I am a truly committed pluralist to Jewish life.
Two documents which have been called groundbreaking were published in the past, past December. One from the Vatican and one from Orthodox rabbis in Israel. Both emphasize a special kinship with one another as regards salvation history. It appears to represent great progress, but in light of what you said about faith and davening from their own realities for authenticity, how do you reconcile this with the relationship between Jews and Christians?
Yes, I was very pleased to see that statement. In the Catholic Church, there has been a sense of really wanting to dialogue with Orthodox Jews. Catholics see themselves as Orthodox Christians, and somehow we liberal Jews aren't quite the partners they fully want. I don't think they reject us as partners. They're happy to have us as willing partners, but they would like to somehow be talking to people who take Scripture as seriously as they do, and so on. Heschel was a good partner for them because he took the biblical language so very seriously. Not literally, but Catholics aren't literalists either. They too have an interpretive tradition. And so they've been looking for partners in the modern Orthodox community, and they've now found partners in this new document. My near neighbor at Boston College, Ruth Langer, who is the ordained Reform rabbi, now lives as an Orthodox Jew, and she's been bringing together some groups of modern Orthodox Jews and Catholic intellectuals. That's been very interesting and positive. And those people have been courageous because they have gone beyond the great mentor of modern Orthodox Jews, Rabbi Soloveitchik, who said, no, we have nothing to say theologically to Christians. We can talk about, that's mitigate anti-Semitism, we can talk about social good in this country, we can talk about racism and other things that are of mutual concern, economic justice even, but we can't talk theology because we have nothing to say, because we have the truth and they have the falsehood. And even though he too was a modern, educated person, he stood his ground there, but something in the ground of modern orthodoxy is shifting. And that's very interesting and positive. I do not think anybody in either of those dialogue camps wants to break down the boundaries and wants to say we are all one tradition and wants to say Christians are Jews or Jews are Christians. I think they're both being very careful to be respectful of the difference. But at the same time to understand, yes, that we do speak out of a mutual recognition of legitimacy. As I say, I reject efforts that go on the two covenant theory and say that legitimacy extends only to Christianity. I don't think I want to be part of that club.
What if the Siddur looks like an expression of the language of Katnut and no longer appeals to ordinary Jews?
No longer appeals to some ordinary Jews, but it appeals to an awful lot of ordinary Jews I see in Orthodox synagogues that are pretty full, while our liberal congregations are pretty empty. I have to notice that. I am not part of the triumphalism of Orthodoxy. I don't like some of the triumphalism of Orthodoxy, but we would be foolish not to notice that the kind of Judaism that is thriving these days is a Judaism that lives in the very traditional world. I find it, and I just wrote to a friend in Israel this morning, early this morning I wrote a letter to one of these people in the Smichat Zionit program in Israel. I said I find it sometimes intellectually dishonest because they pretend that those two great battles of the 20th century didn't happen. They just go on as though the Torah really were literally the word of God given, and there really was someone who was watching from heaven to make sure you do all the mitzvot in exactly this and that way and so on. And how can they pretend that? But the truth is there is something alive and thriving in that Judaism. And sometimes very devotionally and spiritually rich for many people. And we shouldn't deny that that's there, even though it is not our path. So I just don't want to say it doesn't speak to anyone today. And I think in saying that, you sort of put yourself on the outside of a very big part of the Jewish community that you should notice is alive and well. And now there are many people for whom it doesn't speak, and I think we need alternatives for them. I think every major Jewish community, every large synagogue, should have a traditional kind of service, should have an experimental, creative kind of service, and should have a meditation service with a half hour of silence ended with a called out Shema Yisrael. I think that because there are plenty of people who want a place in the Jewish community and can't use the Siddur at all. And God bless them, let's welcome them, let's find room for them, let's make room for them. I'm all for expanding the varieties, expanding the options, but not for universal declarations of this is passé, this doesn't work anymore. That's a little beyond where any of us has a right to go.
So I think this is going to be the last one, and it's actually going to be, they're kind of connected, so I'm going to ask to sort of put them together. One is, perhaps there is another side to the coin of religious imperialism, which is religious